And we are live here in the Storycraft Cafe. I am your host, Hank Garner, as always. And today it is my distinct pleasure to welcome in Terry Brooks. What can you say about Terry Brooks that hasn't been said already? A fantasy legend who nearly 50 years on of writing and publishing is still pushing the boundaries and bringing out brand new work that is challenging and entertaining, and gives us a new lens to see our world through. And that's what I love about your work, Mr. Brooks. And what we were just talking about a minute ago before we went live here is that fantasy is a great way to see the world around you. And I've been a fan uh, nearly my entire life, my entire reading life for sure. And I uh, love the new book. The new book
Thank you.
is the third book in a new trilogy. It's called Sister of Starlit Seas,
Hmm.
and the Viridian Deep series. I love this book. I know everyone else is too. Welcome to the show, Mr. Brooks.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. So we were just conversing about our shared love of William Faulkner,
Hmm.
and you would think a an author who has published fantasy stories for published 45 years or so, probably been writing fantasy stories for close to 50 years. Faulkner is not someone that people would typically associate with your foundational writing life. Tell us what it is about Faulkner that inspired you so much and set you on this path.
Well, it's kind of a building project, I guess you'd say, because I grew up in an era in the 40s and early 50s where fantasy wasn't really a presence that, except for a few seminal books like the Oz stories and things like that.
Sure.
Kids my age were not reading that. We were all reading science fiction.
Right.
that was
Adventure
what
books.
that was what interested us, and me and my friends were all involved in the science fiction TV shows and everything else that were going on at that time, which have long since been forgotten for the most part. I mean, how many people remember Tom Corbett's Space Cadet and that sort of thing?
Right.
So I didn't come to fantasy until much later, except for those few books that everybody else was reading, Alice in Wonderland, that sort of thing. I really uh, came to it uh, through Tolkien. That was, and I read that in college. But by that time, I was heavily involved in reading other kinds of stories, and was also involved in writing. I had gotten something published at 13 in a local Illinois historical journal, where you submitted something about Abraham Lincoln, which, speaking of seminal figures, and
Right.
so that got published, and I got all excited about being a writer for a while. But I was an English major and loved English, and had an affinity for it. So I was an English major in college when I went in, and by that time I had read an awful lot in 17, 1800, 1900 English literature. But one of the writers who fascinated me the most was William Faulkner. And by then I'd read all of his work, and I had decided to do my senior English thesis on Faulkner's work. And so when you do something like that, you really do have to immerse yourself in what he's doing.
Sure.
Everything about what he did about talking about the relationship between the classes, mostly of the Deep South, and the way they interacted, and the way that the poor and the rich preyed on each other in one form or another, the haves and the haves not always fighting for position, spoke to me about the world at large. Even at my age, I knew how it worked. And I thought, this is so good. What can I do with this? And about that time, I read Tolkien, and I thought, if we got rid of all these appendices and all this stuff that nobody pays any attention to anyway, except the scholars, this could be a really interesting way to approach an epic fantasy. So that was kind of my leap stone for going into the whole series. And I go back to Faulkner periodically to read some, his various works at one time or another. I have to read. Oh God, no, I can't get the name of it. This is what happens when you reach 80: is you can't remember anything anymore. Um, the story about the bear and the dogs. Oh my God, what was the name of that? At any rate, that story, that long short story,
Yeah.
was probably one of the most seminal things I ever read. It was so powerful to me. It spoke to me in such a powerful way that to this day, I just have to go back and reread it again to see how good he was when he wrote that book.
I love it. I love it. And what is so interesting to me is that uh, we're all telling human stories.
Mm-hmm.
The window dressing may change. The genre window dressing, and we may take certain classes of people and give them a new designation. But we're still talking about the differences and the commonalities of people, and how relationships are built or torn apart, and um, that's what stories are, and we just find new and different ways of expressing that.
That's true, and I think it's a lot of it has to do with your affinity for what appeals to you as a writer, if that's what you're trying to do. How do you choose to couch your story? What setting, terms, era, characters, and so forth, and that has a lot to do. Is a lot of it determined by the way you approach the story that you're telling. So, I read I tell other writers all the time, particularly young writers, if you really want to be any good at this, you need to read a lot. You
Sure.
probably should read more than do anything else. And not only that, but you should read outside your field. Whatever you're writing, read something else. You'll learn something that way,
Right.
because it's a new medium. You'll get great ideas just by seeing what writers not working in your field can do with putting a story together. And I'm luckily for me, I'm married to a former district manager for Walden Books, uh,
That's
who
handy.
reads about 4 times as much as I do, and she reads all over the board. So when she tells me I should read something, I take that as a message from God, and
Right.
go down there and I read it, because there's always, she has an eye for things that are meaningful and expressive and revealing, and I think that's what, as a reader, you're always looking for. Teach me
Right.
something with what you're writing. Tell me something about the world. Give me some insights into what life is like from your point of view, and that's what expands our knowledge and our enjoyment, and gets us involved in what's going on. And it's the one thing that no other form of entertainment can do, because of the length of the time and effort you have to put into it, which I like.
Sure.
I don't like things that are over 2 hours or 3 hours. I mean, they can be powerful and I'll remember them, but they don't stay with me the same way that a book that I have put a week into, or whatever it is, and has really touched me. They put a different kind of memory in my mind.
Gotcha. I am 52. I turned 52 a couple of weeks ago,
I
and
remember 52 in a vague sort of way.
when I was growing up, there was no shortage of science fiction and fantasy stories.
True.
I remember as a kid going to the bookstore and the fantasy section being a couple of bookshelves wide.
Hmm.
Um, and it has grown ever since to now, when our local bookstore is called Books a Million. And when
Hmm.
you go in Books a Million, the fantasy section, which then butts up against science fiction, it, takes up one of the huge walls that go.
Swallowed it up, hasn't
Yeah,
it?
it's one of the biggest sections in the store,
Oh
if
yeah.
maybe eclipsed only by romance. I'm not sure. I haven't
Yeah, that's
measured
probably
square
about
footage,
right.
but
Yeah.
but it's huge. And so, through my lifetime, it has grown and grown and grown. When you first started writing and publishing, you mentioned the Frank Baum, the Oz books,
Hmm.
and there were a couple of other books and series, but it wasn't
Hmm.
until Tolkien dropped the Hobbit and then the Lord of the Rings that fantasy really kind of became a genre to be reckoned with. You
Hmm.
had a front row seat for all of that and
I
this
did.
change in our reading habits, and then the writing habits of
Hmm.
authors. Do, as you were witnessing this, could you tell the sea change where fantasy was coming into becoming a mature genre, and I don't mean mature as in the writing style, but as in like a market force to reckon with.
I sure could, because I was right there at the start of
Right.
when it really took off.
You were riding that wave.
Primarily through Del Rey Books at that time, and then later some of the uh, other formats came into also involve themselves. But there were 4 or 5 of them starting out. I remember, I was there when there was myself and Stephen Donaldson, Piers Anthony, David Eddings, Anne McCaffrey. We were all there at the same time, pretty much in the late '70s and into the early '80s. And so that was really the jumping off point for so much of what still stays with us today in the fantasy field. And at that time, well, when I published, I was about the only thing that was out there besides Tolkien. So I sort of
Yeah.
had the field to myself for a while there. But it was a small field. We all knew each other. And so there wasn't a whole lot of going around. The people I knew best were old science fiction writers, all that old cadre, the Futurians and so forth from back in the '30s and '40s. And Lester Del Rey was my editor. So, I got to meet all these guys and
Yeah.
listen to them talk. And of course, that was mind blowing experience, I'll tell you. Um, but then everything just mushroomed all at once in the '80s. And it was really buttressed when we got into Harry Potter,
Oh,
uh,
sure.
and some of those, and Philip Pullman, and, all of those other books that uh, became film and practically everything else under the sun, and just blew up the field entirely. And today, what's happened is that we've all of us from that time, practically been eclipsed by young adult fantasy, which is
Right.
massive, massive, massive. Uh, Numbers of people. I don't begin to, I meet these people, interestingly enough, through my work. I don't know most of them. As much I don't know, and even know who they are, and yet
Wow.
they've got 3, 4 books out there, and they're selling out like crazy. And I'm thinking, how come I don't know anything about them? And of course, the exposure is difficult to obtain if you don't have a direct connection or a reason to do it. I can read so much, but I can only read so much. So
Right. So, what do you attribute the love for fantasy and the rise of these types of stories? What I know that you did a TED talk several years ago
oh
about
yeah,
why I write about elves.
right.
I believe that was the name of it. It's
Yes,
been
it
a
was.
while since I watched it, but there was a collective hunger for these types of stories. What
There
do you
was.
attribute that to?
I think it was a hunger that was out there. It's interesting because when I think it was a hunger that was out there, but it wasn't being fulfilled, or recognized. Because one of the first things that Lester Del Rey taught me was that, because I said, this you're going to publish this book. He says, I think it's going to be enormously successful. I had already been turned down, and he seemed to feel like for some reason this was going to go. And he said, people want these books, and the publishers and venues that are turning them down don't see that. They don't believe in it, but I do. He says, I think that market is out there and it's huge, and they want more of what Tolkien was writing. But everybody in the field at that point was saying, oh, Tolkien-esque. Nobody wants more of that. Like, since when, something that
Right.
sells like that and does like that, since when doesn't the whole, country want a lot more of that? And that's kind of what they discovered. And once that market got going and it got built on by all the other venues for entertainment, then it became kind of a mushroom that just ballooned out there and grew so fast that the publishers could hardly keep up with it. And now, of course, it's kind of flooded the market, so it's not quite what it was when we started out. But the
Yeah.
demand is still out there because people, particularly young people, but all ages really. I've found over the years that my audience started out young, as you might expect, in the teens and the early 20s. Now, if I go back, I can get 8-year-olds from 80-year-olds showing up and talking about those books. And now I got 50 years of perspective looking back, and they come through and they all have stories. I didn't read anything until my father, my mother, you name it, gave me your book or got me involved with someone else's book, and then I moved to your book or whatever. But now it's a clear market, and it's been embraced by all facets of the publishing industry. And so there's all these extra shelf spaces being given over to it because there's a market for it. It's like everything else. If it sells, you're going to get people doing it, and there's going to be product made available.
Do you remember what the first ideas that you had for that first Shannara book? And it is Shannara, not Shannara, right?
That's correct. It is
Yeah.
Shannara.
Do you remember what that first impetus for that first book, what that
Oh,
initial kernel of an idea was?
yeah. Like I could remember yesterday, let alone however many years ago that was. I started writing that book in 1969. How in
Wow.
the heck? I must have been, you know, I must have been about 23 when I first, 24 maybe when I first started writing it. I really don't. I think I like those books. I like those kinds of sweeping stories. I wanted to write something that was multi generational, multi sweeping. I wanted it to be on that venue that says there's no boundaries on who the readers can be. Anybody can read these books. There's
Right.
nothing in there that would be prohibitive. Maybe today, in today's climate, I don't know anymore. Uh, but the idea was these are the kind of books I grew up loving, and I wanted to write something like that. And, is there anybody that can't read Faulkner? Well, maybe if they can't deal with his language, because he's an erudite writer, and he's obviously very intelligent, and he's got some dark ideas about the world. But that doesn't, that's hardly grounds for backing away from something. So
Right.
I think that's as much as I can remember about it. As I wanted it to be the kind of book anybody could pick up and read if they had an interest in doing so.
Gotcha. And your Shannara series is probably the thing that you're most well known for, but then
Yeah,
there's also the Landover series, and
yeah,
there's the Word in the Void series,
yeah,
and now the Viridian Deep series.
right.
Uh, when you begin a new series, uh, is it the same process? Each time, do you go to the well in the same way each time? Where do these new worlds begin for you?
There's a lot of it's the same thing, I guess. You do something for a long time, you're going to draw on the same impetuses that you've always used. However, one thing I've learned to my chagrin is that it's a whole lot different when you're 20 than when you're 80. And that the energy level, the functionality, everything else from back then is long gone. And I can't do it that way anymore. I don't have the same capability to endure that I used to have. So I have to work at a different pace. My times for doing things always change based upon, as you might guess, with most writers, where you are in life, assuming you have a life besides
Sure.
your writing. And so it's different when you're a student. It's different when you're working and you're single. It's different when you're married. It's different when you have children. It's different when if you're working another job and then you're not working another job, and so on and
Right.
so forth. So now I am retired from everything. My kids are all, so old I can hardly stand it. My youngest grandson is 27. So
Wow.
what the hell happened? Uh, so I just have to, I have to adjust each time out with what I can do. So the ways ideas used to evolve and the ways in which I used to structure stories and make it work the way that I wanted them to, they're not there anymore. They don't work in the same way. And certainly my endurance isn't what it used to be. So I have to adjust accordingly. I'm still doing a book a year roughly, but I can see that probably coming to an end and me going to maybe a book every other year, that kind of thing, because, as I get into my 80s, how much energy am I going to, more energy am I going to have then than I do now? I can't
Sure.
expect that that's going to happen.
Does has your pre-writing routines changed through the years? Some people are dedicated planners and
Mhm,
outline everything and really think through all
mhm.
of the ups and downs of a story ahead of time and then start drafting it. Some people just right into the dark and just run off, has your process changed?
My basic process is probably still the same. I'm pretty much a planning kind of guy. And I outlined heavily in the early days. And lately, my wife, my editor, my agent, and so forth on down the line have all said, you probably need to outline a little more thoroughly in advance these days. So I listen to what they say.
Yeah.
And I know they're right because, for one thing, my memory isn't anywhere near as good as it used to be. So I can remember things close up and personal at the moment.
Right.
But if I get way away from it, then some of it starts to drift more, and I have to go back and check, on basic things like spellings and all that kind of stuff. So that's different too. I just think you have to adjust to where you are at any given age. If you're lucky, you'll get as far as I got without having to do that, and I got all that way really till about 3 or 4 years ago. But I'm in a different place now, so I have to take a much more thorough approach, and outlining has suddenly become a much better idea than it used to be. But the trouble is that there's only so much you can do with that. And
Yeah.
I keep telling my editor I can outline, but I'm going to change it
Right.
because as I write, the writing is going to tell me what's going to work and what isn't going to work and what has to
Sure.
change and what I can keep. And there's no way you can foresee all this because your mind doesn't stop working. It's like somebody asking you, when do you stop writing? Well, never. It never
Never.
stops.
Right.
It doesn't matter where you are and what you're doing. You're always thinking about your writing. And,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, and the funny thing
if
is,
it was easier.
right. And the funny thing is that when you're writing, the characters have a tendency to do what they want to do, and
Yeah.
writing is one of the only things that we can say, well, the characters were talking to me, and they don't want to lock you up when you talk like that. That's writing is one of the only times where you can talk to imaginary people and it's just part of the job.
Hmm.
So
Without
characters
people
will
thinking you're nuts.
right, characters will derail a story in a heartbeat.
Well, yeah, it will, and that continuity is obtained by the fact that you are thinking about it all the time.
Right.
And if you're thinking about anything all the time, you're going to have reflections and revisions going on in your thoughts. I mean, it's like thinking about what happened at the party last night. It's going to play out differently in 24 hours than what it
Sure.
really was at the time. But I think there is that the maintenance of that continuity is pretty darn crucial to the success of the story because the books that don't hang together in a way that feels natural are in trouble. Um, then you're into James Joyce, and you're thinking, what is he saying? But I don't know. I'm pretty straightforward type writer. I'm not a complex writer. So for me, that continuity part is what holds my books together, and I think gives me the readership that I have.
Yeah. fantasy is interesting because you can reflect the real world and things that are going on in our real world into this world and have it couched in these great adventure stories and these different characters that have all these different traits. And you can really kind of play through the scenarios of the real world in this imaginary place. The world has changed a lot in the last 50 years, and in some ways it has not changed very much at all. Human nature is still human nature, and
Hmm.
people treat each other poorly for all manner of
All
reasons.
kinds of.
All kinds of reasons.
Yeah.
No matter which end of the spectrum you're on, people behave badly. Um,
Mhm.
do, have you ever do you ever think about how the real world reflects in your writing, and do you look at things differently now than you did 50 years ago?
Oh, I think I probably look at some things differently, but like people say, so where do you get your ideas? And I say, I just pick up a newspaper and see what's going on.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm instantly pissed off about something,
Right.
almost without uh, exception. It's like trying to talk about politics and then is there anything new in politics? No, there isn't. Thank you. Do I have any better ideas? No, I don't. Uh, do I have any deeper opinions about? No, I don't. Uh, it's you're just sort of there. For me, I'm always looking for interesting questions. I always ask questions. Why in the world did this person do this? Or why in the world did these people do that? And I try to think through. Is there something here that could be explored? Uh, for example, in the Shannara books, I wrote about a character named Grianne Omsford, and Grianne Omsford appears in, I don't know, 6 or 8 books in
Hmm.
one format or another. And I wrote about her because she started out as somebody who was taken as a child and subverted, and she became an assassin. She was taught this is what she could do and how to do it and so forth. She's young, she's malleable, you know, so she did this. Then I wanted to say, all right, what if she discovers that she's been twisted all her life to be the way she is? How does she recover? And then the question is, well, she's already got a reputation. How much of that can she overcome? Of course, I'm back thinking about politics again, uh,
Right.
and televangelists and what have you. And I'm thinking, oh, well, the answer is, I don't know. Why don't we look at this? Why don't we see what this might be? And then I'm thinking, well, if she gets far enough to one side or the other, can she ever come back? Is there any way to fully redeem yourself? And I decided, no, there probably isn't. But you maybe could do something to pull yourself
Right.
back over, in the opinion of the larger population. So those kinds of things intrigue me, and that's the kind of thing I'm always looking for when I'm writing about my characters in that series in particular. And just taking a close, hard look at a certain person's life or certain people's lives in interaction with each other, plus alone, and saying, what is a logical conclusion of this story, and what is it that I want the readers to take away? Usually what I want the readers to take away is some kind of speculation about how they think things might have worked out, or whether they feel like the person was treated fairly or unfairly. Excuse me for keeping going back to my non-alcoholic glass here, but I can't I can barely talk right
Yeah,
now.
I'm doing the same. I've got this tickle in my throat that I keep trying to keep washed down. One of my favorite types of fantasy stories, and I would say it's a guilty pleasure, but I don't feel guilty at all about it,
Okay.
is the portal fantasy. And ever since reading a Connecticut Yankee in King
King
Arthur's
Arthur's
Court,
Court. Yeah.
um, there's something that I just love about those types of stories. So
Mhm.
your Landover series is one of my all-time favorites.
Mhm.
Um, wh- what what it, th- I I've tried to kind of pin down what my fascination with this subgenre is, but there's just something about this fish out of water, this person that's transported to another place and
Mhm,
everything is brand new and nothing in that world works the way it does here
mhm.
that I just love. How fun was that series to write for you?
Easy. It's the easiest series I've ever wrote, and it's
Really?
because I was writing about myself. I was writing about my own life. I was writing about the time period in my life because it was happening right in front of my face. So there it was, where I decided I was going to terminate practicing law for good, walk
Right.
out the door, and go full time to writing books. And it was when I wrote Magic Kingdom for Sale that all this was transpiring. And I thought, what is it here that I want to look at? And I thought, well, this is a life transformation story. You know, you leave one life, you leave one age, because by then I was, I don't know, 42 or something like that. And you move into the next phase of your life and you leave one form of making a living to a new form of making a living and one style of life. I was leaving everything behind because I was in a very bad place. I was in the midst of a divorce. I had met my current wife. I was deeply in love with her. I was, I was going to do all these things. I was going to move out of the city I'd lived in all my life and transport to the West Coast and live in Washington State. All this was happening. And I thought,
Complete upheaval.
this is a midlife crisis thing going on here, is what it
Right.
is. Let's face it.
Yeah.
So write about that. Write about that. And so I thought, well, what if you're given a magic kingdom? So you get a magic kingdom, and you're told you're the king of this kingdom. You get to rule everything that happens in your life. But a lot of people are trying to kill you, and a lot of people don't like you, and all those negative types of things. And Lester Del Rey said to me, I tried to sell him this whole thing, and he said, I don't know, and then he said, you should probably go home and just see what you can do with this, and try to put it together in some reasonable form. But I don't know that you're the writer for it. Well, there's the kind
Mm.
of challenge you can't back away from.
I'll show him.
The hell, you say?
Yeah.
Uh, so I just took it home and went with it. And I thought the whole thing was, how does he actually make himself the king of a kingdom where nobody believes he's any good? Nobody thinks he can be successful. Nobody thinks he's got anything going for him. And why is he king in the first place? What do you do with that? And I thought that's intriguing. And what are the benefits or the negative things and all of that kind of stuff? And so it was and then after that, I just had to, build his story as he progresses through various phases of his education as being a king, and
Right.
with his strange friends, new friends. It was fun. I haven't written one of those books now in almost 15 years, but I think about going back to it a lot. I probably will at some point.
Can I just say that people would definitely buy those books if you went
Yes,
back?
I know that's true. It's been long enough, particularly. I don't have an idea, but I'm in the midst. I just announced the other day I'm doing 3 new Shannara books. So once I get and I've written one of them. When I do the other two, I might very well go back and do a Magic Kingdom book just to wrap things up, because I don't
Well,
really have any other series I want to go back to right now. So.
well, if you need an idea for it, just pick up a newspaper.
Yeah, that's right. Well, that's what I'll do. Exactly. Whatever's
Right?
going on at the time, with whatever people there
Yeah.
are, Kardashians or whoever, I'll find
Whoever.
something weird enough in there that I can make use of it.
Right.
Yeah.
So we've got the Shannara series, we've got the Landover series,
Hmm.
the Word and the Void series. That was another departure. What was the thinking for that series?
Um,
Because that to me, that's maybe one of the darkest works that you've done.
it is dark. It's also I think to this day I think that Running with the Demon was the best book I ever wrote,
It was a
and
fantastic book.
I will stand up and defend that. I think, but That series got written because I had an offer I could not refuse. Uh, the kind that says, write a 3-book series for us and we will throw a lot of money in your direction. And
And you say
so
yes to
I
the.
said, yeah, sure. Okay. That all sounds good. And I gave it a lot of I gave it a lot of thought, but the main things that were drove it was I wanted to write a story. I wanted to write an end of the world story, and I wanted to write an end of this world story. I wanted to do it, and I went back to the Shannara books, and I thought, well, how about the time of what things were like before the Great Wars and before everything changed, and uh, we would look at this world and its decline in a series of books and see how it evolved into this new world, and that became those first 3 books. So, and I had a lot of fun with it. It was a very dark, very episodic, sprawling story that involved elves and everything else under the sun, and demons of all kinds, and gave me a chance to couch everything in current terms that I saw about the world. Everything, including the fact that in the original books, the destruction of the old world came about through a apocalyptic uh, destruction of everything. Uh, and at that time, I was looking, for that to happen in some fashion or other. So that was basically, and then I wanted to develop a story that showed how people fought their way through issues and managed to get past even the worst things, because we know that happens. And I just wanted to see if I could do it more than anything else. Uh, my publisher was distressed, and you will never guess why. They said, "This is a great book, but why did you choose to make the main character a woman?" They
Are
did.
you serious?
I am serious. And I said, because it works better that way for the type of story I'm telling. Also, I was raised in a matriarchy. That's helped format my thinking and involve me much more with women and women's issues and women's thinking and all of this than for most people, or for a lot of people anyway. Um, and also, I'm really not. I don't know. I'm not a. I don't know how to say this in the right way. I'm not really geared towards male stuff, as opposed to, I don't know, more of a central place in the world, I guess.
Yeah.
My friends have always been women uh, for various reasons, but um, I just felt like mostly been my friends. I identify with their thinking better
Hmm.
about things, their emotional states. I understand that better. Uh, you know, um, I don't know. My life is kind of weird because I've always done sports and things like that, but it's never been I've never been driven that way like I am by books and by relationships, I think is a better way to say it. So
Yeah.
that's shaped me as much as anything does. And to this day, I'm surrounded by daughters. I have one son who is a tech guy, which is, we have 2 places here in life. We have tech guys who are here. Wait a minute, I got to get this right. One here, and then we have me, who's over here. I always ask tech help if I want to actually know how to do anything. Um, so I just I just feel like that probably drives me more in terms of um, I don't know. In my high school school for years, I was always the top boy in the standings. The next one in class, I don't know, somewhere like 12 or 13 or something like that. Next kid in class, and they tell you this stuff. I don't know why. It seems to me like it's something you don't need to know. Next person was 32. Everybody else was female. So I was in
Wow.
classes constantly. All my classes were always three or four boys and 28 girls, all of them. And I got feeling a little weird about that after a while, but it changed because I went to a male college. And
Kind of
there they
forced
were.
me.
Then I, it was all I could do just to find a date for the weekend, let alone anything else. So,
Wow. Well, speaking of the female protagonist and this kind of
yes,
view of story, the
yeah,
new series Viridian Deep,
yeah,
um, also tends that way. Where because this series to me is a complete departure
it is.
from most of your earlier work, but when you get to reading it, there are definite
Yeah,
Terry Brooks isms
yeah, you could
all
see it.
through it. And I just made that up on the spot. But
That's a good one. I like
you
it.
can your fingerprints are all over it. I mean, this is 100% a Terry Brooks
you
series,
you can tell my
e
books. Yeah, there's no
even
question.
though, the window dressing is completely different. So where did
Yeah.
this come from? And it's a little different tone, a little different perspective, that young adult fantasy that we touched on earlier,
Well,
tends that
I'm
way.
writing on I write on the border all the time anyway. I'm really writing very close to what the really good young adult writers are writing these days in terms of their
Right.
skill set, and it's a fine line between in fantasy, particularly between adult and young adult. There are a lot of young adult books I read by writers who I think are just terrific. And I think any adult would read this book and have a good time with it because it's
Sure.
smart and that sort of thing. So, but you get a skill habit. It's the same reason. It's the same reason I choose somebody like, oh, I don't know, like my protagonist in the newest book, young woman. It just works better for her to be her and not him. She's in prison. Goblins are her jailers. She doesn't know anything much about her background, and
Right.
everything she thinks she knows is wrong. Even to the point that what she knows about her family is wrong. And I thought, well, for this we need somebody of character and strength, but also somebody who is likely to be shocked to find these things out because she's relied all these years on her few memories about what she thinks is true. Um, and so that's why I chose it, and that was much the reason with Ness Freemark. I like writing about strong women. Um, that's probably some kind of Freudian issue of that I'm not aware of, but I do. I like writing those kinds of stories and
Mhm.
examining them and examining the characters and try to explore what they're dealing with and coming to terms with. I like
Right.
to put them in as much stress and danger as I can.
Well, you
To
did that from page
emphasize.
1.
Yes, yeah, yes, you do.
Which
In that book,
which
I wrote those first couple sentences, and I thought I want to put in the first couple sentences something that people can't put down.
right.
And when you say the night they escaped that was from the prison, you've got people hooked right away.
Like,
They're wanting to say more about that.
yeah, something's going on here.
Yeah,
Um,
and it's funny because when I started out writing books, they were all done in Tolkien-esque style.
right,
Slow, gentle. We get into it gradually, and it builds from
right.
there.
And you're
And by the
150
time
pages before anything happens.
I know, and really the Shannara books start out that way too. But by the time I was into the '90s and so forth, bang, you were in that book right away, or you were
Right.
putting it down and moving on to the next one. And I changed my whole opening style for those books, and said, that was the whole story behind writing the Writing with the Demon series the way that I wrote it, and pretty much everything I wrote after that. You can see it in the way the books open. So I think you have to go with the times. Things change. What appeals to the public, what they look for in a story, it's not going to be the same after you've done 50 years of this kind of work. It's
Sure,
going to be
sure.
different. And if
Well,
you're not
and
paying attention, and you know, then you
readers'
have an uphill
taste
struggle.
change, the
Yeah.
market changes. Well, and when you walk into a bookstore and you literally have an acre of fantasy books to choose from,
Hmm.
you've got to grab their attention somehow so that they pick this book instead of
That's
the
right.
hundreds, thousands others to choose from.
It's why they spend a lot of time on cover art in
Right.
publishing business. And I remember one of the lessons I learned from Lester early on was with Black Unicorn. Black Unicorn has this garish cover with rainbows and this black unicorn that actually looks like a donkey, and all this other stuff going on, and this green woman standing there. And I told him, I said, I hate this cover. What are you doing here? And he says, you're looking to sell the book, right? Yes, right. And he says, all right, now take that book and walk across the room over there with all those other books and put it face out where they are and on the shelf. I said, okay. And he said, I'll come back over across the room. He says, all right, now look over there. What do you see? I said, well, I see my stupid book right there. And he says, that's right. You see your book.
Bingo.
And it's
Right.
because of those colors and all that strangeness going on, you've attracted the audience. It's the reason of the color arts that are used in book. If you put an orange cover up there, people notice it. They don't
Right.
just ignore it. They're going to say, what the heck's that? But he says part of everything you do is grasping the audience's attention and holding it. And I have learned that the no truer words were ever spoken. I found that out recently, strangely enough, with this new series. I thought, well, Child of Light, they'll just pick that up and look at that. And they'll say, well, when I got to the third book recently that just came out and started talking to people, because I went out on a 10-day tour, and tons of people came through and they said, we had no idea you wrote these other two books. And I thought, well, my publisher should be shot at dawn. Uh,
Right.
that's true. But it was just a case of they didn't get the word for one reason or another. And you never can take for granted that no matter how successful you are or who you are, that you're going to just simply get, unless you're Stephen King, maybe,
Right.
you get picked up. So I'm always conscious of the fact the cover art's important, that all the things that you do to make the book available, because it's not like a movie. It's
Right.
simply not. You don't get the same publicity. You don't get the same attention. It's not like gaming. It's not like any other form of entertainment, not even theater, because you don't get those big color ads or those big photos in the New York Times or anything like that. You don't get anything like that with books. Books are
Right.
subdued and genteel and are meant to be discovered. Yes, well, you better help people discover them or you're going to
Right.
have an uphill battle.
Well, the new series is Viridian Deep, and the new book is Sister of Starlit Seas. And now is a perfect time to get into the series because the three books are out now. And when you get into that first book and you love it, and the way I know you will, you're going to want to grab that second book and then the third book. For folks who are not familiar with the series yet, what's going on? Where do we find ourselves, and what is unique about this world?
Well, I've put a fairy world and a human world side by side, separated by a barrier, but you can cross that barrier in certain situations. And I'm
Like
writing
portal
about
fantasy, I guess.
somebody who is a young girl who is imprisoned in the human world by goblin creatures come over from the other world. How in the world does that happen? And I'm saying, and the people that are all in there are young people, and they're all human. So what's going on? Why are they there? Most of them don't have much of an idea of what they're doing there. And then we get a chance to cross over from one world into the next world, and we begin to see what the difference is between the two worlds, which right away is very apparent. They're very different spaces. Neither one is necessarily good, better, or worse than the other. It's just that they're different, except there's magic present in the fairy world. where there's only magic brought over that's present in the human world. So there's a lot of back and forth thing on that too. But mostly we're finding out that the people in both worlds are very similar in terms of their emotional and mental capabilities. There's fears, the things that they're struggling with, and as you know, as we think is true between countries as well. And there's a different mindset in some ways, but mostly they're all up against the same problems. And our girl in that's come over from the other world is discovering that the thing she's up against is discovering that nothing she thought was true about herself is true, and her whole life is going to be in an upheaval. And on top of everything else, she's falling in love with a fairy creature. We got to dress this up, right? So I see tons of possibilities for this sort of thing, and I've written 3 books. I don't know if I'll go on from here or not. I'm pretty content with where it is right now, but I may get a itch down the road to do another 1 or 2.
I love it. I love it. And recently we announced that you're returning to Shannara.
I am, yes.
So when you have a
I said I was retiring.
well,
Uh, I was very careful about it though, because
yeah,
I'm tricky that way. I all my announcements said the same thing. I was going no further forward in this story, so there would be no more after this last book. Last Druid was the end of the series. Moving elsewhere. Then I moved elsewhere for a while. But what I didn't say is I wouldn't go back. Pretty tricky, huh? So
pretty
I
tricky.
did go back, and in fact, chose a spot to write about. That is in a different part of something I've not talked about before, and that has been referred to over and over again, and really feels to me like it needs to be covered for me to call this series complete, which I would like to be able to do. So that's what I'm doing.
Love it. Will that debut around this time next year?
Yes, probably in October, I think is what they're
Okay.
looking at right now. I would like to see it earlier than winter. Uh, this year I went only to warm climates, and I could only go in a few places because number one, I'm not who I was, and number two, I had a limited time period to work with
Yeah.
because of my involvement in the next book in the Shannara series that I wanted to have finished before I even left on tour. Didn't quite make it, but I got close. Yeah.
Gotcha. Sister of Starlit Seas, The Viridian Deep, Book 3, available everywhere now. Go visit your local bookstore, pick up a copy of it. If you don't have a great local bookstore close to you, we'll drop links in the show notes where you can pick it up from Amazon or Audible if you prefer to listen to audiobooks.
You can
Sister of Starlit Seas, available everywhere now. Mr. Brooks, if people want to dig into all that you have created over these last 5 decades, is there a place that's a good place to start to get familiar with your work and to jump in?
Well, everything I write is written in series. So all the books at the front of the books list what's in each series. So the trick is don't read the middle book of a 3-book set. Go to the first book in any set, and anything that looks catch your interest, and pick it up and start there. And you'll know quick enough that this is something you want to pursue, and then you can take it from there. There's 30 books in the Shannara series, and there's 6 and however many 3, and I don't know, however many more of the others. So you can tell pretty quickly what you're up against if you're going to go in. But if you just pick a book off the shelf, you're taking a risk. It's true. You should look at inside the index there and see what the bibliography is and see what's listed.
Well, Mr. Brooks, thank you for providing us with hours and hours of entertainment over these years. And the new series, if you're a fan of Terry Brooks' writing, you're absolutely going to love this. And we also look forward to dipping back into Shannara next year. Mr. Brooks, thank you so much for taking time to come on the
Thank you,
show.
Hank. It's been a joy. I've been having a really good time talking with you.